I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of Australia and their connections to land, sea, sky, and community. I pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and I extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples listening today.
Hello, my love, and welcome to the April and Fritz podcast. My name is Bree, and I'm the owner and head designer here at April and Fritz, a bespoke floral design business here in Melbourne, Australia. Today, I have the great privilege to speak with Oli and Yaz from The Funeral Fix. The Funeral Fix is a training program for funeral celebrants created by Yaz and Oli back in 2021. Now, the reason why I wanted to bring Oli and Yaz onto the podcast specifically was because Dying to Know Day is coming up on the 8th of August. Dying to Know Day is a national campaign that supports Australians to improve death literacy and end-of-life planning. And this year's theme focuses on discussing final arrangements. Now, I've talked about my approach to funeral flowers in previous episodes, but to refresh your memory, I believe it's just about so much more than, going for what's standard or, doing what we think we should do or picking flowers from a menu and being done with it. And my relationship with death has been an interesting one, like most people, I'm sure. It's something that I personally have always been pretty scared of. I think that, I'm an emotional person, and even showing up to funerals, I just kind of get swept up in my feelings and be very upset. So when I started my business, I honestly didn't really think too much about funeral floristry, honestly. And as you'll hear in the episode, but it was actually my partner, Rob, who changed my mind about funerals and death. He is a GP, and as part of his rotations when he was training, he did one rotation in the palliative care ward during his studies. And when he kind of spoke about death and the experience on that ward, it was never spoken about in a gruesome or kind of scary way. It was actually, really special. At any given time, he was kind of explaining to me that, someone was typically saying their final farewells, and someone would be, telling their family and their friends how much they love them and their favorite memories and just so much more. And so what he told me was that, families were just so grateful to him and to the other staff and, the people who were supporting their family or their friends, in their final days. And he reframed it in such a way that honestly just gave me a sense of warmth and love and kind of beauty for what he had seen and experienced while he was on that ward. And so that's actually what piqued my interest initially. I had never really thought about it in that way. I was kind of curious about the idea of death not being this really scary thing, or grief being this really scary thing. And so it just kind of opened up my world to the idea that, you could actually support people while they were grieving and not take a back seat. And so, not many people know this about me, but I actually am a Funeral Fix graduate. And it was really that discussion with him that kind of led me down the path to take the Funeral Fix training. And I was fortunate enough to do that in person here in Melbourne. And it was there that I really felt like I could, make a difference. And in particular, it was really during this time that I learned about the significance of rituals, which, Yaz and Oli will get into today. But, really the significance of rituals during funeral or end of life ceremonies. And so for anyone who isn't familiar, a ritual is really about turning kind of something that mattered most to the person you're honoring into something that is a meaningful or sacred or kind of healing act for guests to take part in actively, passively, however they choose to do it. And ultimately, the idea is that it reflects the person who died. So there are obviously so many big and small examples of rituals, which, Yaz and Oli do so kindly talk about in this episode. But what I realized was that while I was at this Funeral Fix training, it just really kind of clicked for me. I had kind of never really explored the option of funeral flowers in my business. And when I was there, it just kind of clicked for me that I wanted to create custom funeral flowers, not something that would be kind of picked out of grief from a menu at maybe a funeral director's. Again, no shade, there is absolutely a place for that too. But I just knew in that moment that I could do something that could really honor a life and really facilitate healing. And I could do that through funeral flowers, really. And so that's when I really started thinking about April and Fritz through the lens of being more of a lifelong florist rather than just being an event florist or a wedding florist, for example. And so not only did I then add funeral flowers to kind of my business, but the way in which I go about that is quite different. You know, for me, it's more about getting to know someone, their family, their friends, and the stories of their life to create something for their send-off. This could be anything, really. You know, if they have a passion for outdoor walks or they loved their garden or whatever it may be, it's just kind of like at that point in time, I realized through this training that I was able to do something with this information and help people, I suppose. And I really am very fortunate to have had Yaz and Oli join me on the podcast to talk more about modern funerals and kind of the role of rituals and nature and facilitating healing, and just have them, you know, offer you advice about how to plan a modern funeral for yourself or for a loved one. Again, hearing them kind of talk on this topic is incredibly motivating in a lot of ways, because it kind of made me realize, and I hope that it will make you realize too, that this is not something that we need to be scared of talking about. This can actually be a really beautiful, you know, transition in life. And it's not something that we need to bury our heads in the sand about, but rather actually talking about it and thinking through our final arrangements is actually one of the greatest gifts that we can give our loved ones. But before we get into it today, I just want to remind you that the only way that this podcast grows is by you leaving us a rating and review. And it really is my hope that we can create memorable events for every stage of life. And the only way that that happens is by us talking about it. And so without further ado, I would like to welcome Yaz and Oli to the podcast. Welcome to the podcast, Yaz and Oli. I'm so excited to have you here. I feel as though this one has kind of been a long time coming in a lot of ways. I've probably been waiting to reach out to you for quite some time, so it's really nice to finally have you here.
It's good to be here.
Yeah, maybe just as a starting point, can I just get you both to introduce yourself and share a little bit about what the Funeral Fix is?
Absolutely. Well, hi, everybody. We're so excited to be here. My name is Oliver Thompson. I am based here in Sydney, and I am one of the co-creators of the Funeral Fix. Over to you, Yaz.
Hi, everyone. I'm Yaz, and I am based on the Gold Coast, where it is very cold today, unusually cold. But it is so nice to be here. As Ollie said, we are the co-creators of the Funeral Fix, which is a online funeral celebrant training as well as in-person events. We really exist to, I guess, just make the funeral celebrant experience, learnings, teachings, everything that goes with it even better. And we created this course because we really felt like it was something that we needed at the time when we were starting out as funeral celebrants. And we're just so excited of where it's going and where it's headed and the hundreds of students that have come through the course.
Amazing. And so can you share a little bit about how it came to be? You kind of touched on the fact that it was something that maybe you guys needed, you know, at a certain stage in your careers. So how did this all kind of start?
So Ollie and I were both funeral directors to start with, as well as funeral celebrants. And for me personally, I started as a funeral director, and then I found that a lot of my families were asking if I could do the ceremony as well. Before I was a funeral director, I worked in media. I predominantly worked in magazines, but I also did a lot of TV and radio work. So the idea of presenting and working with families to create a really beautiful ceremony was something that I was absolutely drawn to. And when the families kept asking if I would do the ceremony, I decided to say yes. But I found that when it came to the training side of things, obviously I wanted to have a deeper understanding and a deeper knowledge around curating really beautiful and modern ceremonies. And with my own business, Rite of Passage Funerals, that's really what we specialize in. So I wanted the ceremonies to really be elevated and use beautiful rituals and rites of passage, as the name of my business suggests, to really elevate the standard of funeral ceremonies in Australia and around the world. But I found that for me personally, in order to get all the information that I needed, I had to go to multiple different sources as well as do a lot of self-learning. So essentially, the course I wanted just didn't actually exist. And it was then that I reached out to Oli and we connected and we instantly we got on really well, but also our philosophy towards ceremonies was really aligned. Our philosophy towards funerals in general was really aligned as well. And so I kind of pitched this idea to him to do an online training course, because at the time there was also not an online offering. You'd get sent out like a folder or a big booklet with 100 pages in it. There wasn't actually at that time a fully online funeral celebrant training that taught you everything that you needed to know, not just the writing of the ceremonies, but also how to look after yourself, how to look after your families, how to market yourself in an industry where, let's be honest, no one wants to talk about death. So how do you create something that encompasses every aspect of funeral celebrancy? And thankfully, Ollie said yes. And we worked for about 18 months to create the course before it went live. So it was a huge undertaking. But the Funeral Fix was born. And since then, we've expanded not just from the online offering, but to in-person events as well. We've got a really exciting launch next year, which is a whole new course, which we won't divulge too much today, but it's just going from strength to strength, and we're so proud of the Funeral Fix.
Yeah, and I think modernizing funerals was something that we really saw an opportunity to do and to help empower others to be able to look at more modern and personalized ways to be able to honor life. Both Yaz and I had some training, but I think we felt a little bit like there was more opportunity to be able to develop something that went a bit deeper and, like I said, covered the full gamut of kind of what's involved in being a funeral celebrant.
Amazing. And yes, I'm really curious, like, how did you go from kind of media and, a totally different industry into moving into funerals? And Ollie, what was your kind of experience prior to moving into funerals as well? How did we kind of move into this space in the first place?
Well, I started out as a wedding celebrant, a marriage celebrant. So for 10 years, I've been a marriage celebrant. But even during my training, my Cert 4 in marriage celebrancy, I had an interest in funerals, but it took me some time to kind of get the ball rolling in that, mainly because I didn't really have the knowledge or the empowerment or the confidence to really know how to get the bookings, advertise, market myself in that field and everything like that. So it was an area that I kind of didn't delve into for quite some time. My background before that was in marketing, and before that was performing arts, which I still dabble in every now and then. So a bit of a mixed bag. But Yaz is a lot more exciting.
No, I don't know about exciting. More just, I think, left field. So mine, I guess, was more of a personal experience in that my mom had a very near-death experience. She had an allergic reaction to her chemo treatment and was in ICU for 10 days. And it was there that the doctor started to talk about whether or not she'd make it. I mean, she was really, really close to death. Thankfully, she did pull through and she's still alive and thriving today. But I just remember in those moments how unprepared I was, how unprepared my family was for, death in general. And also when I started to think about funerals, the offerings that were available just really were not conducive to how I would want to farewell my mum. And so at that time, my career in media was absolutely thriving, but my husband and I had decided we wanted to move to America. So we sold all our belongings and moved with our 2 young children to America. And it was over there that I really started to think about, okay, what do I want to do? I don't feel like media is really where my true purpose and calling is. And as we decided to come back to Australia, I really started to explore and educate myself on funerals. So it was kind of through really just a lot of soul searching that I landed on this is exactly where I want to be. I feel like there's a massive opportunity to modernize funerals, especially here in Australia, but all over the world. And what can I do in this space with my existing experience to really help families and help people? And there's been a lot of, soul searching and self-exploration, and it's just such a beautiful field. I think once you get the call to work in funerals and you start to feel drawn to this work, it's so fulfilling and so beautiful. But a lot of people are just really scared and uncertain to work with people in grief, but it can also be really, really special.
I think it's just to add, it's also really fulfilling work and rewarding work. And I think one of the things for me is hearing people say something like, that was the best funeral I've ever been to. And almost catching themselves saying it and being surprised by it, saying, oh, I don't know if this is a little bit crass to say, but that was the best funeral I've ever been to. And it actually makes me feel really happy and really fulfilled. And even seeing the look on guests' faces during and after a ceremony that shows they actually enjoyed themselves. And I think, look, that's kind of revolutionary. I don't know if funerals used to be like that.
100%. I couldn't agree more, to be honest, because I think if you've ever been to a funeral where, you kind of walk away and you think, oh, that was just a bit like cookie cutter and didn't really feel like maybe it represented the person, or, they weren't really there. Like, the difference then between going to that versus something like a funeral fix, celebrancy kind of funeral where it is much more personalized, it's much more engaging, and, we're talking about the person and really honoring their life. And those two things are just so far apart when you've had that experience. And so I think there is something that, is quite revolutionary about that for sure. And so can you tell me a little bit more about what a funeral celebrant actually does? I think, to the average, person, it can be a little bit confusing, what's a funeral director versus celebrant versus whatever else. And, what does that kind of process look like when you have found a funeral celebrant?
Well, our course goes over 8 different modules, and in one of our initial modules, we look at, obviously, the role of a funeral celebrant. Now, the short answer to that is, I guess, a funeral celebrant writes and delivers the ceremony at a funeral, memorial, or an end-of-life event. But the reality is it's so much more nuanced and so much deeper than that. So as a bit of an outline of what a celebrant typically may do, we meet with family to delve into the important stories and aspects of a person's life so that we can work those sorts of elements into the ceremony. We suggest meaningful rituals to bring life and to enhance the ceremonies. We chat with family really in depth about who will deliver certain tributes or eulogies, assist family with certain element choices like music and when and how to work them into the ceremony in the most appropriate manner. We write the ceremony from the opening song to the close, providing funeral director with an order of service perhaps, and effectively communicating with them on how the day will run. We deliver the ceremony on the day of the funeral service, obviously. Even manage time restraints sometimes and act as what we say, chief mover honourer. So like if, Uncle Barry starts to talk too long, or if family tensions flare up, which can happen at times, we're kind of in a bit of a position to help manage those sorts of situations. And 2 more important aspects is holding space for people in grief, and like Yaz touched on before, protecting our own emotional health and looking after ourselves. That's a bit of an overview. Anything else, Yaz, that I missed?
I think you've covered all of it, Ollie. Smashed it.
Amazing. And so I guess, what can a potential client expect? So, you've kind of been booked in. What then happens? Do you show up to their house and you kind of just start talking, or what happens from there?
Well, every funeral celebrant will have their own processes and the way that they go about doing things. And I think it's really important to note that if you are looking at stepping into this work, authenticity is really key, because I think the moment is about, this process is actually more about connection than it is about doing all of the steps the right way. But in general, a family can expect you'll contact them directly, or the funeral director might put you in touch, depending on kind of how that family comes to you. And most of the time you will meet in person. I know that some celebrants will also do online. It just depends on the logistics. But there is always that initial meeting where I personally send through some preliminary questions just so that my families know that these are the types of questions that I'll be asking. They have then the opportunity to answer them online. Some people prefer to type them up and take a little bit longer to think about them if they want to. But it's really then about sitting with the family, connecting with them, making them feel really comfortable, because often when you think about this type of experience, people are in a state of grief. They're also really uncertain and perhaps even a little bit nervous about what to expect. So again, it really comes back to making them feel very safe and very connected so that they do feel comfortable opening up and sharing more about their person. In that first meeting, you will, of course, ask lots of questions and also just get a feeling of the type of service that they want. What do they want out of this ceremony? What's their appetite for rituals and different ways for people to experience their grief and express their grief? So that may be as simple as coming up to light a candle or placing some flowers on top of the casket, or to more like deeper, even more traditional or cultural rituals as well, and how we can tie those into the ceremonies. Because for me and Ollie as well, and a lot of our funeral fix students, rituals are those beautiful anchoring points in the ceremony that can really elevate it from good to great. It's also talking about music and photos and slideshows and those kinds of elements that may be weaved into the ceremony as well. And just, I think, ensuring that when you walk away from that meeting, the family feel like they're in really safe hands. And that, as Ollie said, perhaps now this has gone from something that they're totally dreading to maybe something like I've had families say, I know this is really weird, but I'm actually really excited about the ceremony now, which is such a shift
Oh, I
in
know.
perception.
I love
Yeah,
that.
it's like, wow, at first they think, oh, I'm just
Yeah.
dreading this. And then it goes from, oh, no, this is actually going to be really beautiful and
Yep.
really meaningful and healing for me in the way that I need it to be. So it is about getting those golden nuggets, as we call it, and asking those questions to really dive into what the purpose of this ceremony is for those people and how we can facilitate even just a very gentle level of healing. It's not our job to fix everyone's grief or solve it in any way, but it is an opportunity for us to give them the availability, I guess, or the opportunity just to lean into their grief in whatever way they want. So once that initial meeting has taken place, we then go and we will write the ceremony, and maybe there's some additional follow-up questions that we need. So you're constantly liaising with your family. I always send a copy of the ceremony ahead of time to families. Other celebrants don't. It's totally personal. I do for two reasons. One is just fact checking, making sure that all the information they've given, obviously in a state of grief, sometimes things can get a little bit mixed up, dates, names, things like that. Also, just to make sure that they're comfortable, there's nothing that's going to trigger them in the moment. I'd prefer them to not be sitting there going, oh, she's used a word that I don't feel comfortable with, or ahead of time, rather than sitting in the ceremony and doing that. And then, of course, you deliver the ceremony on the day. You work quite closely with the funeral director to make sure that they're up to date with everything. You prepare the order of service for them so that they can go ahead. The funeral director can do the order of service sheets. And then at the end of the ceremony, obviously, the job is complete, and I have this little self-care ritual that I always do at the end of ceremonies, but also if I'm working with trickier families or really heavy circumstances. So there's also that element of self-care that we all have hopefully, I know our funeral fix students should have that self-care practice, that they also take care of themselves before, during, or after ceremony as well.
I think one component of self-care is just acknowledging boundaries as well, and that's something that we talk about in the course and we hone in on in the in-person events as well. And that particular topic just seems to reign true for so many people and really connect with so many people, just about understanding sort of what our role is and what our role isn't, and making it really respectful and gently defined to our clients so that they kind of know what we do, when we're available, and all of that sort of thing, so that the role is really clearly defined and the parameters are as well.
Yeah, no, 100%. I think that's so important too, because, you know, again, like you said, you know, emotions are typically very high in these kind of times, and it can be quite overwhelming. And, you know, especially if you're like, oh, I forgot that thing, I just need to call them right now and just go for it, you know? So I think the role of a funeral celebrant, like you said, is to support the family, but without obviously, you know, not being able to look after yourself. That's not the point. So,
Definitely.
And I'm really curious because what makes a funeral these days modern versus something maybe that is considered more traditional? Like, what does that kind of mean in today's context?
Such a good question.
Well, for me, I think it's all about truly honoring the person and creating ceremony that actually reflects them and who they are and what they were known for, not necessarily just following a script or a template or filling in we do this in a 45-minute session in a chapel. Not that there's anything necessarily wrong with that format or that approach, but the more, I guess, we are educated and aware of our options, the more fulfilling and healing a ceremony can be. Modern funerals, in my opinion, are all about finding the core essence of a person and memorializing them in the most fitting way, to define it that way. But there's so much more to it than that, and I think that can mean whether they're passionate about nature, how do we incorporate that element in? If they're passionate about food or a particular artist, I don't know, how do we incorporate that sort of thing? Or what were they known for? And that's how we ritualize as well.
I think it's also really about throwing out the rule book. Like, there's so many different ways that we can honor someone's life. And I think that when we really think about the term modern funeral, it's that it doesn't have to necessarily be a stiff room with chairs set up and a casket up the front. It can be in a really beautiful venue. It can be outdoors. It can be a memorial instead of a funeral service with the casket present. It can be anything from a bushwalk where everyone is scattering a little bit of ashes along the way to you might be out on a boat to, I think it really is about throwing out the rule book and looking, as Ollie was saying, at that person and also the people left behind and what they need in order for them to heal. And for me as well, I really like to incorporate all of the senses into my ceremony. So that might be burning an essential oil or something that is nostalgic and reminiscent in terms of smell for that family. It may be having the food on show for the wake afterwards. A lot of the funerals I plan, we have a venue where there's the funeral and the wake in the same venue. So the food is on show when people arrive. So it's really like not just a feast, but a feast for the eyes, and lots of personalized touches, so little candle lighting stations or memory card stations or photos everywhere. And I think it's also about, when speaking of ceremony specifically, the structure of the ceremony. As Ollie was saying, it doesn't have to be a template anymore. It can be, the structure of the ceremony can be whatever you want it to be. You can even be a silent ceremony. I've heard of families who like, there are actually just no words. So they've literally not said a word, played a little bit of music or not had music. Maybe it was about the floral arrangements or just something really beautiful and special. And I think it's really important for people to know that when it comes to funerals, there are no rules. And so just go in with an open mind, and the more creative your celebrant is and the more creative your funeral director is, the more you're going to get out of it.
Oh, I love that so much. In the lead up to this conversation, when we were kind of talking about this, I had mentioned that I do have this vision of like, one day maybe funerals will kind of almost be like weddings in a lot of way where, you're trying to reflect, yourself, and, people are planning it in advance and they're kind of really thinking things through rather than it being such an afterthought. And what I love about something like Dying to Know Day, which is actually coming up, is that it encourages people to stop and think about these kind of final arrangements and what they might like. Because, let's be frank, I think, me as a little girl, I wasn't thinking about, what would I like at my final arrangements? I was thinking about my wedding day and all these other things. So, when I think about what I might like, it does kind of make you stop and really think. And like I said, Dying to Know Day really does make you stop and think about it. And what I'm wondering is, with this year's theme being, have you thought about your final arrangements? Why do you think this is important? Why do you think it's important for people to, stop and actually think about this kind of stuff?
Well, I think that, and I've seen this firsthand, that unfortunately when people are hit with a sudden death perhaps and not sure of what their person's wishes were because they'd never had those conversations, they're often not prepared. And I think having those conversations would provide your people with answers that they need, so that, you're not exhausting your energy making decisions, or even having arguments about what it is that we might need or want when we die. And I've seen this firsthand. The best gift that we can give our friends and family is the information to help them when our time comes. It's so powerful. I just see it work.
Yeah, I have to really agree with that, Ollie. I think the shift in giving your family that gift, there are so many decisions that need to be made when someone dies, and I don't think that people actually understand that. There are so many decisions that your family need to make on your behalf, not just for your funeral, but after that. There is a lot of admin involved in wrapping up someone's life, hopefully with a big beautiful bow on it. And so taking care of at least one aspect of that for your family and having everything taken care of. I'm working with a family at the moment whose person wrote like literally a guest list, the music, the venue, everything that they wanted. And so when I met with them, they just were like, this is what they wanted. These are a few additional things that we want. We think she'll be okay with that. And it's such a gift. It just removes such a burden from your family. And so I'm all for this year's Dying to Know Day theme, because it really reminds people and prompts people to think about what their final arrangements are. And I actually have a little e-course, e-book called How to Create an Unforgettable Funeral that I have available at the moment at a discounted rate for Dying to Know Day. And that talks people through all of the processes that I use to plan a funeral. And that is everything you need to think about, from styling to venue to your options like cremation, burial, water burial, all of the things that you basically need to know about a funeral. And then a plan so that you can leave it and gift it to your family. There's a workbook. It's like a one-stop shop for people who actually want to take this seriously and give their family the ultimate gift of planning their funeral. Because as Ollie said, like it is so important. And as funeral directors, we see all the time, and obviously funeral celebrants as well, we see all too often that the flip side of that coin. And it can be really hard at a time where people just need easy.
Yeah.
Totally. And I think as well, like, how empowering to be able to like take that moment for yourself and be like, right, this is the things that I love. These are the things that I want. And, I have people in my life who are going to honor that and, sprinkle a bit of their own magic on that too, like it just, to me, it doesn't get more empowering than that.
Yeah, I think that's so important.
Yeah. Unfortunately, in the Western world, we're a little bit fearful when it comes to death, generally speaking. And I think we have this fear, perhaps, that if you talk about it, it will come to you sooner. And I feel that there is a shift, hopefully. But I think just having these conversations, like you said, Brie, will empower people to really think about what's meaningful to them. And I think it's a really beautiful gift, like I said, that you're giving to your friends and family to help them with their healing process. It's so much more gentle and generous.
I think also it's really important to note that a lot of people are just like, oh, I don't care what you do, stick me in a cardboard box. They almost feel like it's selfish to take it upon themselves to plan their funeral, like they want to make themselves the center of attention, but it's actually not that. To your point, Brie, it is really empowering. And it can be something that you do as a family, with your family. You have these conversations ahead of time and you can all discuss it together over the dinner table, and you can hear what they want to do. They can hear what you want to do. And it's actually a really beautiful way to bring your family together to talk about something that is absolutely inevitable and demystify death. So it's absolutely not selfish. It is so empowering, and it is actually the most selfless thing that you can do.
Yeah, I agree.
Wholeheartedly agree, honestly. And Yaz, you kind of touched on this a little bit earlier on, and maybe you can help explain to the audience, you mentioned rituals, and, you kind of mentioned how rituals can help create a more personalized ceremony. And so could you maybe explain what a ritual is and why they're important in something like a funeral ceremony?
Yeah, absolutely. So we approach rituals at the funeral fix as any kind of act of doing. So there's no religious connotation attached to that word when we use it within the funeral fix context. It's really just any act that the guests at a funeral can either participate in or witness. So consciously participate in or actively participate in, or simply just be a part of. So really a ritual can be anything, as I said, from lighting a candle or placing a flower on the casket. I've had other more elaborate rituals where the person who had died actually loved flowers and gardens. And so we set up literally like a little mini market store. There were silver buckets with lots of flowers. It was a whole kind of flower stand. It was so beautiful. Some of the greens had been foraged from their property. Some of the flowers had been picked on their property, and then others brought in because it was a really big funeral. There were about 200 people there. But visually, as people walked in, it was this amazing market stall style setup. And then everyone was invited up to place some greenery and flowers on the casket. And so you can imagine at the end, the casket was literally covered, like it was a mountain of greenery and flowers. It was so beautiful. It was a big wicker casket. And that was just such a beautiful yet simple way to honor that person. We've had other rituals where people have had the opportunity to write like their favorite memory or the love note and come up and tie it onto a tree, a memory tree at the front of the service. We've done rituals with crystals where we did a little crystal blessing. This lady loved crystals, so everyone was given a heart-shaped rose quartz as they walked in, a little mini one in a little pink bag. And then when I was in ceremony, one of the things that we did was everyone was holding the crystal in their hand, and we blessed the crystal and infused it with their essence, and it was just so beautiful. So there's lots of different creative ways that you can use rituals, and it's just basically anything that people can actively or passively participate in.
Amazing. And I imagine that it does take a bit of kind of collaboration to get something like that happening, right? Like, you know, you can't just like walk onto somebody's property and start cutting down trees. But, you know, I imagine that their family would have to kind of be able to share some information about that person, and that you would be kind of gathering that during those initial conversations to be able to start getting those creative juices flowing, and enable something like those kind of rituals, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And in the Funeral Fix online course, we have a whole module dedicated to those conversations when you're working with a family, even some specific questions that, you know, students can use to find out more about the person and the life that they're honoring. So asking questions about what that person was known for, sort of like what I touched on before. What did they love? Was it music, sports, flowers, anime, whatever it may be? And then thinking about creatively how you can incorporate those elements into the ceremony. And I think we're only limited by our own creativity. And that's why it's so important to have a funeral celebrant that is empowered and is confident enough to ask the right questions and then be able to make the most appropriate suggestions. And even it might seem a little bit weird even by saying, you know, like, oh, well, can we throw some Allen's lollies into the grave as a part of a ritual kind of thing? But it can actually be really beautiful and really, like I sort of mentioned before, really healing. I say Allen's lollies because I've done that recently. That's why it was fresh on my mind.
I love that.
That's so
I want
great,
Allen's lollies.
Everyone was like, a snake for me, a strawberries and cream for you. It was great.
I love that.
Incredible. And that just goes to show, you know, like you really are only limited by your imagination. But I think a lot of the time, you know, families, when they're kind of going through this, like they just don't know what options are available to them. And so that is really the power of having a really great funeral celebrant. And I would even argue a really great broader team, you know. So I think we'd be a little bit remiss, you know, I'm obviously a florist here, so, you know, we kind of have to talk a little bit about flowers, but, you know, could you maybe talk through a few things, like a few examples maybe of like rituals that have incorporated nature specifically? You kind of touched a little bit on that, Yaz, but, you know, I have personally seen just how powerful nature can be in funerals and how healing it can be. Just recently, I actually had you know, a funeral where there was this beautiful old nonna who basically took, more care of her outside garden than what she did of her inside house, and, had these beautiful roses and all of these different things. And so when I actually go to meet with my families and talk about, nature and how we can incorporate that in specifically, but seeing that all come together, it was incredible. And the family was really like, I looked at, her casket spray, I looked at the arrangements, and I looked around the room and I could see her and I could feel her. And so I think there is a lot of power in that. And so I'm really curious, could you maybe share a few examples of where you've kind of incorporated nature in maybe some previous funerals?
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to start by saying I love your approach, Brie. I think that it's so new and fresh. And as a funeral director / celebrant, I wish you were here on the Gold Coast, because I just think it is incredible, the amount of detail. And that is what we expect from ourselves and our students as well. I know you are a student of the Funeral Fix as well. And I just think that taking that initiative to be able to go out and meet with the families and make it as personal as possible is exactly what we need more of. So kudos to you for that, because it's incredible. And I think, like you, nature plays a really big part in how I approach the planning of a funeral and writing of a ceremony, especially when you come across clients who, like, it resonates with them as much as it does with us. I think people kind of are drawn to us in a way because they know that we are more modern and open to these types of ideas. I've done quite a lot of baby and little one services, and I use nature a lot for those types of services. Obviously, the ceremony for a little one is quite different to an adult, or at least at the Funeral Fix, that's how we teach it. And that's how, when I'm working with a family of a little one, I approach the ceremony slightly differently. And nature often plays a really big part in that. So some of the examples that I personally have done is setting up a rug, like a round jute rug at the base of either the casket or the urn table, and then having flower, just the heads of the flowers, as a beautiful mandala. So they're arranged in a really sacred geometric pattern, and people have then picked up that flower. Both of the ceremonies actually that I used that similar style in were close to the water, and so at the end of the ceremony people would come and take a flower from the mandala and place it in the water. And for one mom in particular, the first time I did that, it was really weird because I'd spoken to the mom, I'd done the meeting, and I was percolating on some ideas of how we could create a really beautiful ritual for that family. And that was out in nature, right down by the water in Byron. And this idea of this mandala, flower mandala, just came to me. Like, it was just almost like I could see it. It was a vision type of thing. And I said to the mother, I've had this idea. Why don't we do a flower mandala and I explained how it would work. And she said, oh my gosh, that is so crazy, Yaz, because I've always wanted a flower mandala. I wanted it at my wedding. And then I've just been obsessed with mandalas. I love them. And the fact that now my little baby has been able to give an opportunity, as devastating as the situation was, that resonated so deeply with the mother in particular, but the whole family. And just seeing that ritual play out as the flowers went out to sea was so sacred and so beautiful. So that's one of many examples of where I personally use nature and flowers and work with the family to create something really beautiful and personalized for them. Each of our services, all of the flowers are completely unique. I don't even have photos that I show them. It's like, what do you want? How can we create something really special for you? So yeah, that's how I approach it. And I'm sure, Ollie, you have lots of examples too.
Oh my God. Sorry, just Ollie, before you jump in, I'm just going to say, I've got goosebumps. And that's the thing, isn't it? It's like, that really is the difference. You can go and just pick off a menu and be like, yep, cool, that casket spray, because I guess they liked pink or whatever. And yes, that will be beautiful. But what you're talking about, Yaz, is, shivers and the impact of that is just so far beyond just some pretty flowers, you know, and that's what I think it really comes down to.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, well, I wasn't going to go into any sort of examples because I think Yaz sort of covered it, but I think it just sort of exemplified the importance of choosing the right funeral director that can actually work with you and provide those alternate options and provide the space for you to contribute, where you go, you know, I don't know if this might be possible, but can we do this? It's like, of course you can. We'll probably talk a little bit more about that later, but that's all I wanted to add at that point. It's so important that you're working with the people that share that vision, right?
100%, honestly. And I think that just goes back to kind of having your dream team in a lot of ways, people who are going to be open to your ideas and, you know, not even just open, I would say, but really encourage it. And that's, again, what we're talking about here. It's not just the cookie cutter, you know, we'll put it together and it will be, yep, cool, some closure. We're talking about healing, and we're talking about, you know, really facilitating the people who are left behind being able to move through those emotions.
That's it.
And I think it's also important to note here that when talking about budget, this is about priorities. So it is about, as you said, Brie, bringing your dream team together. And often you'll find that it doesn't have to be an overly expensive funeral. It's not like you need to have the best of everything. It is knowing what your priorities are and redistributing the money that you have into the things that really matter. And that is how you'll get the best bang for your buck, because it may be out at the beach, you're not paying a venue fee, you're not paying for those types of things because you want to be out in nature, and flowers are really important to you. So that's where you want to allocate the majority of your funds. So I think it's really important for people to know that as well. This doesn't have to be a really expensive exercise. It just is about doing what feels right for you and prioritizing the most important things in your healing and finding the right people to facilitate that.
Oh, that is like such an important point, I think, as well, because, you know, we can talk about the big elaborate, you know, casket sprays, and we can talk about the big elaborate venues and all of these different things. But fundamentally, again, I think what it comes down to is like, is this going to help represent the person, and is this going to help facilitate healing? And, you know, again, if you only have a limited allocation financially, like, what are the things that are going to have the biggest impact on you? And so with that in mind, you know, how can listeners kind of initiate these kind of conversations if they are wanting to incorporate things like rituals or natural elements like flowers and those kind of things into their ceremonies? How do they kind of start that conversation?
I think sort of like what I touched on before, finding the team, but finding the celebrant and the funeral director, they might even be the same person that you connect with, because I know some funeral homes run very differently. So it's important to connect with the ones that suit you and your needs. I had a family recently tell me that they had contacted 2 other funeral directors who told them what they wanted to do wasn't possible. They came to me, they ran me through what it was they wanted to do, all very legal, all very possible. Sure, a little bit more logistical organizing to do, but all legal and all very possible. But it was specific to them and what they wanted. So I'll always do what I can in my role, provided, like I said, it's legal and it's in the best interests of the families.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that pre-planning piece is also really important. So planning ahead of time, putting your priorities down on paper so that your family are aware of it. And then, Brie, as you said, like really starting to proactively seek out the suppliers and the people that align to your vision and what you want and your budget and all of those elements, so that when the time does come, your family know exactly who to call and what you want. And again, just gifting them that ultimate, you know, blessing of, this is exactly what I want and these are the people that I want to do it.
Yeah, that's perfect. And so I guess just as an extension of that, how can, you know, if you do want to start organizing, you know, your funeral, how do they kind of bring up that topic of conversation with people like their families or their loved ones about their end of life wishes? Yaz, I know you mentioned a resource earlier. Would that be a good place to start?
Yes, that would be a great place to start. I think that definitely it's a bit of an icebreaker as well, because you've done a bit of the heavy lifting, and then you can say to your family, hey, I got this, we can do it together, or I've already done it. Can I talk you through my wishes? And so that's like a really nice way to start the conversation. Otherwise, I think just using those opportunities, I think when you're really comfortable with death, it's not hard to bring up those things with your family. So I think that there is an element, and we talk about this a lot in the funeral fix, is really getting comfortable with your own relationship with death. So that may be exploring what your priorities are, what you want, going through the process with that resource I mentioned earlier. And then it's kind of demystified for you. So you can comfortably say to your parents or your kids or whoever it is in your family, hey, let's talk about death. Like, well, this is what I've decided on. I obviously talk very openly about death with my family, so it is in no way taboo. My two young boys are often waxing lyrical about, all of the things. And so I think just kind of starting with yourself and really thinking about, well, am I ready to plan what is my relationship with death and the feelings that come up with that? And then talking really comfortably and warmly and openly with your family about, what you want. It doesn't have to be scary, and it definitely won't speed up the process. I promise.
Amazing. And I guess as well, like, I'm kind of jumping around a little bit here, but, we did kind of talk about that dream team and that sort of thing. So when, maybe somebody is meeting with a funeral director, or maybe, they are meeting with a funeral celebrant, what kind of questions should they be asking to see if that person or that business is the right fit for them?
I think sharing the vision, asking specific questions, asking for examples of perhaps work that they've done is a really great place to start. But also just seeing if they've got the openness and the willingness to be involved and to follow what that vision is, I think is probably really important as well.
And I also think just getting a sense of that feeling, like it's like with any service-based business, it's, does this person make me feel safe? Does this person make me feel like they're able to walk me through this really important stage in my life when I'm grieving? I think it is about just finding someone that you connect with and that you trust. And, I think even just something as simple as that. Do you like this person? I think that there's something to be said in that, because you do work quite closely, even if it's a short amount of time. You're in a really vulnerable state. So finding someone that really understands that and is compassionate to that and able to see, as Ollie said, your vision and work with what you want, I think is really important as well.
Absolutely. And I definitely feel like, within yourself, like everybody's experience of being vulnerable and in that state of grief is going to be a little bit different, and so as you're kind of working through those emotions, it's being held in those. And it doesn't mean somebody's like therapizing you, but it does mean that somebody can be like, I see you and I'm hearing you and I understand, and like, let's work together through this, I think.
Absolutely.
Beautiful. And so I guess just lastly, where can listeners kind of connect with people like Funeral Fix Celebrants? Is there somewhere we should be sending them to get all of these great resources?
Well, for all of our graduates, they have access to be part of our directory for free. So we have a celebrant directory on funeralfix.com.au. So if you're looking for a funeral celebrant in your particular area, you can search for ones that have graduated the course. Bree, you need to get up there ASAP, by the way.
I do.
But we also have other resources. We just wrapped up season 1 of the Funeral Fix podcast. So, when your listeners have finished listening to April and Fritz, or they need a moment to mix it up a little bit, perhaps, welcome to head on over to the Funeral Fix podcast. You can join our mailing list on our website, follow us on our Instagram, and why not even sign up and enroll in the course to learn more about funeral celebrancy. And it doesn't have to be for right now either, but when you are asked to help with someone's funeral, we hope that having the knowledge of having done the course or having access to the course means that you'll be ready. A lot of marriage celebrants are actually doing our Funeral Fix course. They're becoming funeral celebrants. They're diversifying. And a lot of the skill sets are really transferable. So it's really exciting to see people moving into both areas. And some will say, it's probably not something that I want to do right now, but next thing they know, they've got a previous client that's asking for their help, and then they're reaching out to us. stressed going, help, I've got a funeral next week that I have to do, and I wasn't originally planning on doing it. But those ones that have actually done the course and have been asked, off the cuff to be able to help with somebody's funeral, have had the knowledge and the confidence and the skill set to be able to go, yeah, I can absolutely help you. And they got the resources there because the access to the course is for life.
And I think also other suppliers like you, Brie, like you're a florist, but you wanted to work in the funeral industry and you wanted more experience, and taking that initiative is amazing. So whether you're a caterer or a florist or, anyone, you don't even, if you're interested in working in the funeral industry, this is a really great place to start, because you get such a thorough understanding of your clients, of yourself, and the process that's involved. So take Brie's initiative. Be a Brie.
Honestly, I couldn't agree more, because I think the thing was like, I think I was always curious, it was not something that I was like actively like, okay, I'm going to become a funeral celebrant, but it just kind of started floating around my mind when my partner, who's a GP, he was doing a palliative care rotation, and he kind of really shifted my mindset around death. And I think that opened up a whole new world for me. And honestly, I wasn't really sure how I was going to kind of use it, to be honest with you, when I did start. But I would say it's been one of the best investments I've made for my business, just to be able to hold my clients in that time and be able to really partner with them, not just, here's your flowers, like I said, pick from a menu, but really get to the heart and soul of the person that we're trying to remember. And so many of the things from the course have helped me, not just professionally, but I would even argue personally, because, I have older grandparents, I have older, people in my life who, are starting to have these conversations. And I think, again, being able to hold them in that, there's something really beautiful versus just being like, no, I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to think about the day that you die. Like, forget it. It's actually much more than that. I got much more out of it than what I was even expecting, to be honest.
Oh,
thanks, Brie.
Thanks, Brie. That's so beautiful. That's so good.
Of course. Well, what I will do is I'm going to share, obviously, all of the links and all of the resources and everything like that in the show notes. And we'll be sure to, share this on all of the different places. So you can go ahead and follow Oli and Yaz, of course, at the Funeral Fix. I really strongly encourage you to reach out and get involved in the conversation of Dying to Know Day. Thank you so much, Oli and Yaz.
Thanks for having us. Thanks, Brie.
Thank you, Brie.
Thanks, April and Fritz.